Well, we continue our coverage on the big business of corruption in South Africa. A couple of years ago, my next guest estimated that the country lost more than 700 billion rands to corruption in the past 20 years. Well, the CEO of the Anti-Intimidation and Ethical Practices Forum, Dr. Claudelle von Eck, joins us now. Good evening, Doc. Thanks very much for coming through. It is bad, isn't it?
It is very concerning. Well, of course, in the global context, we also need to understand that corruption has risen all over the world. But for us here in South Africa, yes, we should be concerned.
Now, your profession as internal auditors are the ones who are supposed to point these wrongs, go through all the financial statements, find out who did or didn't do what. When you look at the rise in the levels of corruption, do you feel that you are doing the job that you are supposed to be doing?
Firstly, let me just add to what you said in terms of what internal auditors do. Internal audit is not primarily a financial discipline. It is a risk-based discipline. It looks at all aspects of the organization. Because remember, by the time it gets to finance, you're recording and reporting the actions in financial. Exactly, yes. Right. So internal auditors really need to make sure that they're the ears and the eyes of the board, your leadership within the organization. But they report internally. It's not the same as external audit, right? So external auditors would then issue an audit report that says the financial statements as presented and the financial controls, we're happy and we can sign that off. Internal audit reports to the audit committee. So it becomes a leadership issue. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when internal audit has given those findings to the audit committee, what did the leadership do with those findings?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when you look at your ESCOMs, for example, there's a CFO who's been mired in all the controversy going on, actually directly implicated. Yes. And presumably, these are the sort of people that you have to deal with, because the CEO and the CFO are usually, the executive members of the boards.
Correct. But this is why it is so important that your non-executive directors, your audit committee members are strong. So when these things come to the fore, that they hold these executives accountable. Because if the accountability doesn't happen at that level, then we do have a problem.
Where though, do you think someone usually sort of drops the ball? Because if you look at a case like, Anoj Singh, yeah, at ESCOM, this seems to be, he was the guy. He was the one really telling basically the board, what to do and where to look and where not to look.
I suppose a little bit of human nature. We tend to trust. The job of the directors, and particularly the non-executive directors, is to ask those difficult questions and to interrogate. Right? Because now that we look in hindsight, there were signs. So it's like getting into a relationship and being so in love with the individual that we miss the signs that are right in front of us. So it really is important that your directors take a step back, make sure that they ask the right questions. And you can't take anything just at face value, right? So there has to be professional skepticism as well.
But where do you think are the real, where do you think the holes are? When you look at the Steinhoffs, of this world, when you look at the ESCOMs of this world, when you look at what the KPMGs of this world have or have not been able to do, where do you think we need? Do we need to tighten legislation? What exactly do we need to do?
I don't think so much about that it is about tightening legislation as it is about holding people accountable, number one, but also instilling a greater sense of ethical behavior, because it's a human issue. Like, we can have all the legislation in the world, you can have all the rules in the world. If you don't have an ethical base and an ethical culture within the organization, then people are going to find ways around the rules. I believe that when it comes to the leadership, and once again, it comes back to your directors, your top leadership have got to ask the question, are we building an ethical culture within this organization, or aren't we? and ask the right questions. So if we talk about whistleblowers, for example, the Anti-Intimidation and Ethical Practices Forum survey that we conducted last year showed that 25% of professionals in the public sector, for example, fear for their lives. Less than 50% across the board said that they believe that the leadership will protect them. So if they don't believe that the leadership will protect them, why would they come forward? So once again, it comes back to the leadership. So the leadership has got to set the right tone. It also needs to make sure that it asks the right questions, that it has the right processes in place, and that people feel that they can go to them and that they will be protected.
And then what about the role of organizations, I mean, like yours, the Institute of Internal Auditors? And I remember having a similar conversation with Terence Nombembe, following the whole KPMG saga, where the primary concern seemed to be the jobs of the accountants, you know, that are employed by these organizations.
The role of the professional body is to hold those professionals accountable. So it's important that there's a code of ethics that they know, or a code of conduct. The professionals know that this is what they may adhere to, and they know the consequences if they don't adhere to it. So whenever we receive complaints against any of our members, the Institute will then take a disciplinary action. We investigate and take disciplinary action where there is evidence that the professional has breached the code of ethics. But your major role there is holding them accountable, but also to provide guidance. And it's part of what the Anti-Intimidation Ethical Practices Forum is working on, is providing guidance around ethical issues, because you also have to deal with your issues where it becomes gray, where it's not so easy to see the ethical implications in decisions that are being made or actions that are being taken. So important that we train people, that when you see something in front of you, are you able to spot the ethical implications in what is in front of you? And that is where we need to do more, I think, in terms of training professionals, but also do a little more in training them on how to deal with the wolves. Right? Because we train these good people, and we give them this fantastic code of ethics, and we say, go into the organization, and then they hit the wolves, and they haven't been trained to deal with those.
Now, what are the sort of things then that can be put in place? We've spoken about the role of professional bodies. We've spoken about what directors need to be doing. You've spoken about, like, human nature. But are there other aspects of our lives that need tightening or looking into that can actually help in this fight?
Well, my belief is that you cannot look at organizations in isolation from society. What we see playing out in our organizations are symptoms of what we're seeing in our society. So this is a broader issue. Our value system has changed, and how do we make sure that we bring ourselves self-correct as a society? But when we talk about inside organizations, the leaders, in terms of what is our responsibility, are we making sure that there's ethics training within the organization? Are we making people conscious? Do we make sure that people know how to deal with whistleblowers? Leaders, if you talk about middle management, for example, often because they don't know how to deal with somebody blowing the whistle, they may expose that person, and at the end of the day, the whistleblower then find themselves in very difficult circumstances. Are we training those people to deal with those kind of reporting? How you, as a manager, how do you deal with it? As a whistleblower, if the leadership is corrupt, what do I then do? And there are bodies like the AEPF where the people can go to, and there are a lot of avenues, but I think in a lot of cases, good South Africans just don't know how to deal with these things, and we need to train people.
Dr. Von Eck, thanks very much for coming through this evening.
Pleasure.